as you are all aware, there are no boundaries in the oceans. Oceans are transboundary ecosystems. Water from one region, one continent can reach the other continent over a period of time. The circulation pattern can take organisms from one place to another by a natural mode of dispersion. However, for invasion to occur, it is always important to note that as you introduce more and more of the same kind of organisms to a given environment, it is more likely that the organisms can get a foothold in the alien environment. In that context, the human interference play an important role in the translocation of organisms. Now, here are some examples which act as vectors for transferring organisms from one place to another. For example, the ships, which I will come to a little later in my few slides, but looking at other things, academicians themselves could be responsible for their unintentional introduction of organisms into their backyard. It is possible that one goes to a place for collecting organism, brings back to their laboratory for carrying out some research, and after their limited period of purpose is over, they are transferred into an environment which is close by, which allows it to expand its habitat. So, you cannot exclude researchers unintentionally introducing. There are cases in the world where such incidences have taken place, but foregoing that, you can look at other systems like public aquaria, the case that I explained to you earlier on zebra mussel, where people themselves took it to other places and introduced them to a new system where it could not have reached by itself. The navigational buoys, which are an important part of the maritime industry, the drilling platforms, amphibious planes have an equal role in transferring organisms from one place to another. The reason being the surfaces they offer, that is submerged in the sea, acts as a place for organisms to settle. And once these move from one place to another, they can introduce organisms to newer environments. So, they provide mechanism for the dispersal of organisms at a greater strength. Now, if you look at some more of them, even the recreational equipment that we use carries biofilms. The dry docks that we have in our coastal systems for ships to come in and park, and where they are cleaned or their muck that is there in their tanks are cleaned up, can wash up several millions of organisms to the surrounding environment, leading to a pathway for introduction. You can also have a look at this point of the slide here, where you can see floating marine debris. These floating marine debris also act as a platform for organism to spread, because they give conducive surfaces for organism to hitchhike one place to another. Then you have restoration actions that take place, facilitating the spread of organism from one place to another. And then you have canals that are made, actually providing pathways for expansion of the invading organisms. Now, these are all marine bioinvasion actors, where it is not an intention that the invasion or invading organism is introduced to a new environment, but it happens accidentally or unintentionally. But there could be instances where a particular fish, which is of economical choice, is introduced deliberately, and that goes out of control. And when it goes out of control, it actually becomes a menace. It invades, it destroys the ecosystem, it changes the food web dynamics, and alters the ecosystem functioning altogether. And these are some of the major common marine bioinvasion vectors. So, while analyzing the marine bioinvasion, one has to carefully look at what are the possibilities of transferring organisms from one place to another. Now, I deliberately left out shipping in my prior slides to explain a little bit more in detail, because that has been considered as one of the major vectors for transfer of organisms from one continent to the other. the spread of zebra mussel, the spread of the comb jelly, the spread of the green crab, and spread of the harmful algal bloom organism, which I will talk a little bit later, are all possibly translocated through ships. Now, why do I say this? For organisms to en masse translocate itself by itself is a remote possibility. But if you think of a cargo carrier or a oil tanker traversing, let us say, from one continent to other, it gives a huge platform for organisms to hitchhike, either inside the tanks, which is called the ballast water, or organisms that grow on the hull of the vessels below the seawater, that is called biofouling. And these two vectors can actually translocate organisms to a great distance at very great high strengths. And to illustrate the importance of this, in the next few slides, I will show you how actually this facilitates the translocation of organism. Now, taking a look at the first vector, which is the biofouling. This slide shows you a clear image of the ship hull, the propeller, when it is brand new. It is devoid of any organism and the ship owner does not want any of that to be growing, because he would like to have the ship's hull as clean as possible. He gets them coated with anti-fouling paints. But over a period of time, because anti-fouling paints may not work as effectively or have its own lifetime, they transform themselves to a condition of this kind, where you can see a lot of organisms growing up there. So, with the age of the ship hull growing older in the water, there is plenty of opportunities for organisms to get a hold on that and attach themselves and grow. And the next slide, I will illustrate to you how exactly this biofouling process takes place. Now, in the previous slide, you probably saw a clear picture of the ship hull, which is as clean as this. Within few weeks' time or a few months' time, it is filmed by various microorganisms like diatoms, bacteria, and other kinds of organic material, which change the surface of this well-coated, painted surface to one that is filmed, which is just like if you don't brush your teeth for a couple of days, you will have a film on your teeth and it causes deteriorating effects. A similar kind of feature exists in the marine environment, and that actually leads to organisms sensing there is a presence of surface, and larvae of this higher organism detecting the presence of surface and occupying that niche and establish their community. And that leads to a macrofouling community. A diverse range of organisms can inhabit there, including the ones that actually take shelter in those places. So, the most of these organisms that are reported to have traversed could have also gone through hull fouling as a vector, tearing from one place to another. Now why shipping is to be important? If you want to take a look at this clipping that is taken from a movie made by the Global Ballast Water Management Program, you can see that
all ships must carry ballast to keep them steady and level in the water. When unloading cargo, a ship has to maintain its weight on board to stop it rising up and capsizing. And so water is pumped into specially designed tanks. For centuries, ballast came in the form of rocks and sand. But loading solids onto ships was time-consuming and expensive. Then came a revolution in ship design. During the 19th century, wooden hulls were replaced by iron and steel. As these hulls were durable and watertight, it soon became clear that seawater could replace sand and rock. And in harbours, it's always on tap.
Now let us take a look at some of the facts and figures with the shipping industry. Shipping is a very important, very economical mode of transport. It carries more than 90% of the world's commodities, so one cannot live without shipping. A single bulk cargo ship of 200,000 tons at any given time, when it's carrying ballast, can carry around 60,000 tons of ballast water. So, a rough estimate shows that 3 to 5 billion tons of ballast water is transferred from one place to other every year. And another estimate also shows that every 9 weeks, marine species invades new environment somewhere in the world. Now, imagine a port receiving water from a given bioregion repeatedly because of a particular type of trade would inoculate enormous quantities of water coming from that bioregion. So, if from bioregion A, if the ship is coming repeatedly to bioregion B, carrying water from bioregion A, which is infested with a particular organism which has invasive potential, then there is very likelihood chance of that getting introduced to an alien environment. Now, carrying water, as illustrated in the clipping, is very important, that because without the ballast water, when there is no cargo in the ship, the propeller cannot be submerged, and it has to maintain its stability. And ballast water is required to avoid hull stress. So, there is no possibility with the current designs of the ship to have conditions where there is no ballast water being taken in when there is no cargo. The most important factor of this vector is that deballasting generally takes place in the port environment, because that is where the cargo is taken in. And the deballasting is not an immediate process, and is a time consuming process, and it has to be carefully controlled and cannot be pumped out too quickly, because there are limitations of the pumping capacity, there are limitations of the handling of the cargo, there are limitations of the crew availability and many issues. So, it is a prolonged process. So, under this context, treating ballast water becomes an important integral part of the exercise to control bioinvasion. Now, just to give an overview of how much ballast water can actually be transported from one place to another, depending on the type of the vessel, you can see that it can be as minimal or negligible if it is a passenger vessel. But if it is a bulk carrier of 250,000 deadweight tonnage, the normal ballast condition is about 75,000 tons, which is about 30% of the weight of the deadweight tonnage, or it can be as high as 1,13,000 tons, which is 45% of the deadweight tonnage. So, this is an illustration to show most of the ships which carry cargo have to carry ballast when there is no cargo, and that is the root of the problem for transferring organism from one place to another, as where ship is considered as a vector. Now, what are ballast tanks? Here is an example to show you that there are many tanks distributed all along the design of the ship. There are several tanks which are labeled as double bottom tanks, or starboard wing tanks, or fore peak tanks, or after peak tanks. Each one of them clearly designed to carry some weight and some additional weight as and when required when there is no cargo, and that is facilitated by the arrangements in the ship. And so, a ship without ballast would actually look like this, and this is an unrealistic situation. And then if you look at a minimum departure ballast water in fair weather, because as the weather becomes rough, the need for more ballast water becomes an important aspect, because the ship's stability has to be maintained. In this context, you can see some of these tanks are kept vacant with this minimum fair weather departure ballast. Now, if you consider in stormy condition, which a captain of the ship can encounter when he is on the high seas, he actually loads up more ballast so that the ship is much more stable. Now, normal ballast condition to storm ballast condition, you can see that the tanks are loaded as required by the sea state when the ship is in voyage. Now, Does that mean that this kind of water that is transported from one place to another actually help the invasive organisms holistically, totally? The answer is not always true. The answer is not always foolproof 100% that it is all those organisms that take a sojourn into an alien environment get a foothold. Now, if you carefully look at this next few slides, the native population has diverse organism, and some of it actually enter into the ballast tanks. The ballast tanks are not a open ocean environment, they are hostile environments and they have to survive this journey. And those organisms which survive this journey and are released to alien environments, and that or those organisms which are released to alien environment which subsequently establish in an environment and are considered to have biodiversity implication will have an important area that is to be considered in bioinvasion ecology. Now, as told a little bit earlier, the ballast tanks are not as good as an open ocean environment. Now, the fresh ballast source community is coming from an open ocean environment or a coastal environment where the conditions are very fruitful or very useful for the organism to grow because they have the right conditions. But once they are taken into these tanks, it is dark, there is no light available, and the temperatures can change with the voyage, and the conditions, the biogeochemical conditions can change and altering the system holistically. In that condition, you will have 4 different scenarios. Among these 4 different scenarios in the ballast tank, some of the organisms which absolutely cannot survive because there is a light requirement or there is a specific food requirement, or they are very short lived, they cannot survive the journey, they will perish. So, those are not of concern to bioinvasion ecology. But other 3 which are marked in red here, for example, those organisms which do not care where they are, but they can survive, and some of them may actually like because there is a lot of organic material that is being created in the system in the ballast tank and serve as favorable conditions. Some of them may not like, for example, the dinoflagellates or the phytoplankton, they may transform themselves to cyst or resting cells. So, all these 3 conditions actually facilitate translocation of organisms from one place to another as a part of the ballast tank population. In the next few slides, I will illustrate the impacts caused by marine bioinvasion. Thank you.